Hi, I'm Toro, and welcome to Toro's History Lullabies. All my life, I've needed a little background noise to fall asleep. For years, it was just the hum of a fan or some soft static. But ever since wireless earbuds came into my life, I've found myself drifting off to podcasts and documentaries, learning and relaxing at the same time. That's why I started making these videos. Calming stories from history, told gently, to help you unwind, learn something new, and hopefully fall asleep a little easier. So get comfortable, close your eyes if you'd like, and let's step quietly into the past. And if you enjoy these stories, I'd love it if you gave the video a like and subscribed for more. Sweet dreams. The downfall of the Roman Empire. Prologue, a world to dream in. In the hush of the night, when the world grows quiet and the stars gather in their patient constellations, stories drift like leaves on a soft river. Some are small, barely whispers. Others stretch far, long and deep, echoing through centuries. And then there are stories like this one, stories as vast as the sky, unfolding across the rise and fall of empires. Tonight, we drift gently into the tale of Rome, a city, a people, an idea, born by the curve of the Tiber River, rising like a flame in the ancient world, glowing for centuries before settling, slowly, into dusk. There is no need to hurry. Time in this story flows like a winding stream, meandering, patient, untroubled by where it ends. You are safe here, held in the gentle rhythm of history, where every moment is wrapped in the hush of memory. Close your eyes if you like. Breathe deeply. Let the weight of the day slip quietly into the past. Now, picture a world far away, but not forgotten. It is a land of gentle hills and olive trees, of warm winds and sun-dappled roads. It is a place where shepherds once guided their flocks across stony fields, where smoke curled from small hearth fires, and the voices of early people rose into the dusk. It is Italy, before it was Italy, before borders and banners, when it was simply a patchwork of tribes and languages, earth and sky. And there, along the banks of the Tiber, a small settlement began to stir. They did not know, these early Romans, that they would shape the course of the Western world. They did not dream of empires or marble monuments. They built with what they had, wood and stone, sweat and hope. But time has a way of gathering around such places, and so the world began to turn a little differently. Rome, like all great things, began in stillness. Over the centuries, it would swell, not suddenly, but slowly, with the pulse of ambition and the quiet hum of order. A city became a republic. A republic became an empire. And for a time, it seemed as though Rome would never end. Her road stretched across continents. Her legions marched through forests and deserts. Her laws shaped lives from the British Isles to the shores of the Nile. But even the strongest empires move in cycles. Even the brightest flames begin with a spark, and end, at last, in embers. This is the story of that flame. Not its fiercest blaze, but the way it flickered and faded. The gentle unraveling. The slow release. The fall, not with thunder, but with time. We will go there together, step by step. You don't need to remember it all. Just listen. Let the names and places pass by like clouds, familiar or not, they are all part of the dream. And as we journey through the years, from rising hope to quiet surrender, know that every end is only another kind of beginning. In this story, there is no rush. Just the rhythm of the past, steady as a heartbeat, waiting to lull you into peace. So let us begin. Not with a fall, but with a rise. Let us go back to the beginning of Rome. Part 1, The Rise of the Eternal City. Long before it became a name spoken in distant lands, before its emperors, its legions, its marble roads, Rome was a quiet idea, floating like mist over the hills of central Italy. In the folds of a fertile plain, where 7 hills gathered near the winding Tiber River, a small world began to take shape. The land was gentle, but not tame. The river whispered through reeds and stone, carving paths that would one day become the arteries of an empire. The soil was rich, the seasons mild. It was a place where olives and vines could grow, where grain could take root. And where people, too, could build. But as with so many ancient things, Rome's story begins in the space between legend and memory. They say that it started with a she-wolf. Twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, were cast adrift in infancy, left to die on the riverbank by a fearful king. But fate, as it often does in stories like these, intervened. A she-wolf, drawn by their cries, found them. She suckled the children beneath the shelter of a fig tree, watched over by a woodpecker and guarded by the wilderness. Later, a kindly shepherd and his wife took them in and raised them as their own. The boys grew strong and bold. And when they learned the truth of their birth, they overthrew the king who had once condemned them. In time, they set out to build a new city near the place of their rescue. But as brothers sometimes do, they quarreled, about where to build, about who should rule. The quarrel turned violent. And Romulus, in a fit of rage, struck down his brother. Remus fell, and Rome was named. It is a myth, yes, a story passed from mouth to mouth like a lullaby of origins. But within the folds of myth, something lingers, a sense of destiny, of conflict, of sacrifice. These would become part of Rome's soul. In truth, Rome began not with wolves and gods, but with people, farmers, tradesmen, and craftsmen. Gathering in clusters on the Palatine and Capitoline hills in the 8th century BCE. These early settlements slowly joined together, forming a community with shared customs, rites, and shrines. The Etruscans to the north and the Greeks to the south had already laid the groundwork of civilization in Italy. From them, the Romans would borrow, and eventually, overtake. The Romans formed a monarchy, ruled by kings whose names and deeds became woven into early Roman identity. There were 7 kings, according to tradition. Some, like Numa Pompilius, were said to be wise and pious, credited with founding religious institutions and shaping early Roman law. Others, like Tullus Hostilius, were more warlike, leading campaigns against neighboring tribes. The last, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, ruled with cruelty, silencing dissent and expanding his power beyond what the Romans could bear. Under these kings, Rome transformed from a village into a small city. Temples were built, trade flourished, and political life took root. The Great Cloaca Maxima, one of the world's earliest sewer systems, was constructed to drain the marshes between the hills, turning the forum into a usable gathering space. Rome was becoming something more than a settlement, it was becoming a center. But monarchy, for all its grandeur, proved fragile in Rome. When the king's son committed a terrible crime against a noblewoman named Lucretia, it shocked the Roman people. In her grief and shame, Lucretia took her own life. Her death became a spark. A group of Roman aristocrats, led by Lucius Junius Brutus, rose up and expelled the Tarquins. They vowed never again to be ruled by a king. And so, around 509 BCE, the Roman Republic was born. The Republic was a bold experiment, a new way of organizing power, rooted not in a single ruler, but in a system of shared authority and public service. Instead of kings, Rome was now led by 2 consuls, elected each year, who governed together and could veto each other's decisions. The Senate, a body of elders drawn mostly from the patrician class, advised the consuls and helped shape policy. Various assemblies allowed the Roman people to vote on laws and elect magistrates, though not all voices carried equal weight. This new system did not erase hierarchy. Roman society remained sharply divided between patricians, the noble families, and plebeians, the common people. For generations, plebeians would fight for political inclusion, for the right to hold office, to marry patricians, to be protected by law. Slowly, their efforts bore fruit. The 12 Tables, Rome's first written code of laws, were inscribed in the mid-5th century BCE, ensuring that justice could no longer be shaped in secret by the powerful alone. But the Republic was not only about politics. It was also about identity, about what it meant to be Roman. The values of discipline, loyalty, and duty were woven into every part of life. Romans prided themselves on gravitas, a kind of seriousness in conduct, and on pietas, a deep devotion to family, gods, and country. These were not merely ideals, they were expectations, passed from father to son, citizen to soldier. And Rome, even in its early days, was a place of ambition. By the 4th century BCE, Rome had asserted itself over much of central Italy. Through alliances, treaties, and wars, it absorbed neighboring tribes and cities, including the powerful Etruscans. The Roman army, once a militia of farmers, became more structured, more disciplined. Every citizen soldier was expected to serve, and every campaign brought more land, more slaves, more wealth. Then came the Samnite Wars, and later, the conquest of the Greek colonies in southern Italy. By the early 3rd century BCE, Rome controlled the entire Italian peninsula. But power invites challenge. Across the sea lay Carthage, a mighty city founded by Phoenician traders. Carthage was wealthy, with a formidable navy and far-reaching trade networks across Africa, Spain, and Sicily. The two powers collided in 264 BCE, beginning the First Punic War, a brutal, 23-year conflict fought largely at sea. Rome, with no prior naval strength, built a fleet from scratch and developed new tactics like the corvus, a boarding device that turned sea battles into infantry skirmishes. In the end, Rome prevailed, gaining control of Sicily, its first province outside Italy. But the peace was uneasy. 2 decades later, Carthage struck again. This time, the challenge came in the form of Hannibal, a general remembered as one of history's greatest tacticians. In 218 BCE, during the Second Punic War, Hannibal did the unthinkable. He led tens of thousands of men, along with war elephants, across the icy Alps into northern Italy. His campaign was devastating. At Cannae, he surrounded and destroyed a Roman army twice his size. The Roman heartland trembled. But Rome did not surrender. It endured. It changed tactics, avoided direct battle, and slowly wore Hannibal down. Years later, Rome took the war to North Africa. In 202 BCE, the Roman general Scipio Africanus defeated Hannibal at the Battle of Zama, ending the war on Roman terms. By now, Rome was more than a regional power. It was the dominant force in the western Mediterranean. In the following decades, Rome expanded into Spain, Greece, and North Africa, claiming Carthaginian territories and absorbing the Hellenistic kingdoms of the East. Each conquest brought wealth and influence, but also complexity, new peoples to govern, new rivals to subdue, and new questions about what it meant to be Roman. At home, the Senate struggled to maintain order. Rome's economy became increasingly dependent on slave labor. Vast estates, latifundia, replaced small farms. Veterans returned home to find their land sold, their livelihoods gone. The divide between rich and poor widened. Some tried to fix it. In the 2nd century BCE, 2 brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, proposed reforms to redistribute land and grain to the poor. Both were killed. Violence, once rare in Roman politics, began to seep into public life. Corruption grew. Ambition swelled in the hearts of generals who commanded the loyalty of armies, not the state. The Republic still stood, proud, resilient, and strong, but its balance had begun to tilt. And so, as the golden age of expansion settled into something more uncertain, Rome stood at a threshold. It had risen far, from shepherds by a river to rulers of a vast domain. But change was coming. Not a fall. Not yet. But a shift, the kind that echoes for centuries. Part 2, From Republic to Empire. As the sun rises over the lands Rome now calls its own, it shines on a republic grown vast, and stretched thin. The Roman world is no longer a patchwork of Italian hills and farms. It is an expanse of provinces, seas, and distant frontiers. The Forum still echoes with the voices of senators, but those voices are now joined, and often drowned out, by the ambitions of generals, the unrest of citizens, and the weight of decisions made far beyond the city walls. This is not a sudden change, but a gradual one. Like the tide, the shift comes quietly at first, a little more power in a single hand, a little less trust in the old systems, a little more need for order in a world grown too large. And at the heart of this slow turning is one man, Gaius Marius. A military leader of plebeian birth, Marius reforms the Roman army. No longer is military service tied only to land ownership. Now, the landless poor, those with no property to their name, may enlist. In return, they are promised pay, loot, and perhaps even land. To many, it is a path out of poverty. But to Rome, it is a shift of great consequence. Because now, for the first time, Roman soldiers begin to feel loyalty not just to the Republic, but to their generals. Marius wins victories, gains prestige, and is elected consul an unprecedented 7 times. But his success also breeds rivals. One of them is Lucius Cornelius Sulla, another general of noble blood. The two men become locked in a bitter struggle for control, a civil war, with Roman marching against Roman. In 82 BCE, Sulla takes the city by force, a terrible breach of Roman tradition. He assumes the title of dictator, a role once used only in emergencies and always temporary, and uses it to purge his enemies and reshape the Senate. His reign is brutal but brief. When he retires and dies in peace, he leaves behind a republic forever changed. Yet peace does not return for long. Ambition, once loosed, does not easily retreat. From the ashes of these conflicts rises a new generation, men of brilliance, charm, and cunning. And among them, 3 names shine brightest: Julius Caesar, Pompey the Great, and Marcus Licinius Crassus. Together, they form a quiet alliance, the first triumvirate, bound not by law, but by shared interests. Crassus is Rome's wealthiest man, Pompey a celebrated general, and Caesar a rising star with political skill and boundless charm. Through favors, marriages, and backroom deals, they bend the republic to their will. But power shared is seldom power kept. Crassus dies in battle. Pompey turns against Caesar, aligning with the Senate to block his rise. And Caesar, commanding legions loyal only to him, makes his fateful decision. In 49 BCE, he crosses the Rubicon River, a shallow stream marking the edge of his province, and a boundary he was forbidden to cross with an army. It is an act of war. The phrase, crossing the Rubicon, would echo through time, but in that moment, it is simply this, a quiet step into a storm. What follows is civil war. Caesar marches on Rome. Pompey flees to Greece, where Caesar eventually defeats him. The Senate loses what little control it still had. And Caesar returns to the capital, not as consul, but as dictator for life. Yet even he, with all his brilliance, cannot escape Rome's deep suspicion of kingship. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, Caesar walks into the theater of Pompey. A group of senators surrounds him. Knives flash. And Caesar, friend of the people, breaker of old boundaries, falls beneath the blows of those who believe they were saving the Republic. But the Republic is no longer something that can be saved. It has been stretched and strained, pulled in too many directions. And with Caesar's death, the power vacuum draws in new contenders. Another triumvirate forms, this time official, sanctioned by law. It includes Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general, Lepidus, a cautious but aging politician, and Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir. He is only 18 when the mantle of legacy is placed upon him, but already he is sharp, patient, and deeply ambitious. Together, they hunt down Caesar's killers. Together, they rule, for a while. But once again, power shared becomes power fought over. Lepidus fades into obscurity. Mark Antony, drawn to the east and to Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, begins to rule from Alexandria. There, in luxury and distance, he dreams of a Roman world joined to the east, of a new dynasty, a new empire. But in Rome, Octavian watches. He paints Antony as a traitor, a man seduced by foreign ways and foreign queens. In 31 BCE, their forces meet at the Battle of Actium, a great naval clash off the coast of Greece. Octavian wins. Antony and Cleopatra, defeated, retreat to Egypt, where they take their own lives. Their story, tragic, romantic, and deeply human, becomes one of the most enduring tales of the ancient world. And in their absence, Rome is left in the hands of one man, Octavian. But he is careful. He does not call himself king. He takes the title princeps, meaning, first citizen. He speaks of restoring the republic, of honoring tradition. But quietly, through laws, titles, and control of the military, he becomes Rome's first emperor. In 27 BCE, the Senate gives him a new name, Augustus, the revered one. The Roman Empire is born. It is not declared with trumpets or fanfare. It does not erase the Senate, or the old offices, or the rituals of the Republic. Instead, it absorbs them, gently, skillfully, into something new. And the people, weary of war, accept it. They welcome stability. They embrace peace. And for a time, Augustus delivers both. Under his rule, Rome begins its Pax Romana, a time of relative peace, prosperity, and order that will last for over 200 years. Roads are built, cities founded, trade routes secured. Poets like Virgil and Ovid write of gods and heroes. Marble replaces brick. Temples gleam beneath the sun. Rome has changed. No longer a republic ruled by many. Now, an empire ruled by one, even if that one pretends otherwise. And so, we close this chapter not with violence, but with calm. The storm has passed. The civil wars are over. The empire is young, the marble still white, the stars still watching. Rome, once a small town on a riverbank, has become the heart of the world. And yet even now, in this golden quiet, the seeds of future troubles lie waiting, sleeping beneath the stone. But for now, let them sleep. Part 3, The Height of Roman Power. The empire is quiet now. Not silent, for Rome is never silent, but quiet in the way a great tree is quiet. Beneath the surface, it lives, breathes, stretches. Its roots spread across the land. Its branches touch distant skies. This is Rome at its height. Under Augustus, the empire finds its rhythm, one not measured by battles or conquest, but by building. By organizing. By settling into the vastness it now holds. At its edges lie rivers and deserts, mountains and seas, boundaries that define what it means to be Roman. From the cool hills of Britannia to the golden sands of Egypt, from the forests of Germania to the sun-drenched coast of Hispania, the Roman world unfolds like a map stretched beneath the stars. In every corner, there are signs of Rome. Stone roads cross fields and mountains, built with such skill that many still endure. Bridges arch over rivers, aqueducts carry fresh water to towns and cities. Markets hum with traders, farmers, and craftsmen. Inscriptions in Latin mark boundaries, altars, and laws. Coins stamped with the emperor's likeness pass from hand to hand, carrying with them the idea of a single world. Life for many is hard, as it often is, but also structured. There is order here. In the countryside, farmers rise early. They tend to olives and grapes, grain and goats. The rhythm of the seasons guides their days, sowing in the autumn, harvest in the summer, prayers to the household gods in between. In the towns, artisans work in shops, potters shaping clay, blacksmiths hammering iron, bakers rising before dawn to knead dough and stoke fires. Children learn to read and write, often in Greek as well as Latin. Families gather in the evening around low tables, sharing bread, cheese, and stories. And in the cities, especially in Rome itself, life pulses more quickly. The city is a wonder. A place of marble temples and public baths, of fountains and forums. Here, senators debate, orators speak, and crowds fill the amphitheaters to watch races and games. The Colosseum, completed in the later decades of the 1st century CE, becomes a place of spectacle, not peaceful, but still part of the Roman rhythm. There are processions, religious festivals, and quiet walks in shaded gardens. There are streets so full they seem to overflow with language and life. The Roman legions, the backbone of the empire, now stand guard more often than they conquer. They keep the peace at the borders, building forts, patrolling roads, and sometimes, raising families of their own in the provinces. A soldier might be stationed in the far north for 20 years or more, returning home to a Rome that has shifted in his absence. The emperors who follow Augustus continue this pattern of strength and stability. Tiberius, careful and quiet. Claudius, scholarly and underestimated, expanding Roman control into Britain. Vespasian, restoring order after a brief civil war, funding construction with calm resolve. Trajan, one of the greatest, leading Rome to its widest territorial reach, stretching from the sands of Arabia to the highlands of Scotland. Under Trajan, the empire reaches over 5 million square kilometers, a world knit together by stone, steel, and law. He is followed by Hadrian, who strengthens the borders instead of expanding them. He travels endlessly, visiting the provinces, building Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain, not as a symbol of aggression, but of order, a line to protect, to mark, to hold. And then there is Marcus Aurelius, philosopher, emperor, thinker. He rules with a quiet soul, even as storms begin to rise. His meditations, written not for glory but for inner peace, reflect a mind seeking wisdom in a world growing more uncertain. Under his reign, the cracks begin to show again, softly, but unmistakably. Pressure builds at the borders. Tribes outside the empire. Germanic peoples, Dacians, Parthians, test the strength of Rome's defenses. Plague spreads through the population, carried home from eastern campaigns. The economy begins to strain beneath the weight of military costs and a growing bureaucracy. Still, life within continues. Roman law develops into one of its most lasting legacies. It becomes codified, organized, influencing systems of justice for centuries to come. Courts function with clarity and ceremony. Citizens, and sometimes even non-citizens, have recourse through legal channels. The idea of rights, contracts, and precedent begins to take root in human thought. Roman architecture flourishes. Temples rise on columns, domes curve over open spaces, and mosaics cover the floors of villas and bathhouses. The Pantheon, with its vast oculus and perfect proportions, becomes a place where sky and stone meet. And through it all, the people adapt. In religion, the old Roman gods remain, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Minerva. But the empire is vast, and with it comes new faiths. Egyptian cults, Eastern mysteries, and a quiet movement growing in the eastern provinces, Christianity. At first, it is small. Followers meet in secret. But their message of hope, sacrifice, and eternal life begins to take root, especially among the poor, the enslaved, and the overlooked. For now, it is tolerated only cautiously. But it will not remain small for long. And still, the empire holds. It holds because it is flexible, able to absorb and shape, to adapt and endure. A mosaic made of many pieces, each different, yet joined by something larger, the idea of Rome. But beneath the surface, changes are stirring. The succession of emperors, once peaceful, grows more uncertain. Power is not easily passed. Some emperors adopt heirs, others die without naming a successor. Occasionally, a general seizes control. Occasionally, the army decides who should rule. And with each shift, the weight of Rome grows heavier. It becomes harder to govern an empire so vast, so complex, so diverse. Communication, even with roads and messengers, takes time. Local governors sometimes act without oversight. Corruption, slowly, quietly, seeps into the corners of administration. Taxation grows. Coinage is debased. The economy, stretched and strained, begins to wobble. And the people feel it, in rising prices, in shrinking wages, in the long waits for grain. But still, the empire does not fall. It bends. It adjusts. It carries on, as great trees do when the wind picks up. And the memory of its power, of what it has built, of what it still holds, continues to soothe the minds of those who live within its reach. In this moment, despite the slow shifting, Rome remains the center of the world. Its culture, its laws, its language, and its roads shape not only its own people, but all who come into its orbit. It is a mirror in which the world sees itself, sometimes clearly, sometimes not. But always present. The greatness of Rome is not only in its conquests, but in its persistence. And so, as night falls on this chapter, the empire sleeps, not in decline, not yet, but in full bloom. A bloom so large that it cannot last forever. But that is not yet our concern. For now, we rest in Rome's long afternoon, beneath columns and clouds, among poets and soldiers, in villas and valleys and sunlit streets. And in this moment, we breathe with the empire itself. Next, we'll move into part 4, Seeds of Decline, where we begin to gently trace the deeper shifts, the growing instability, the pressures on the frontier, and the slow unraveling of Rome's inner harmony. Part 4, Seeds of Decline. Even great empires, like the tide, do not fall in a single crash. They recede. First slowly, like the whisper of a breeze before the weather changes. Quiet shifts in weight. Subtle changes in light. The leaves turn before they fall. So too with Rome. In the stillness of its golden years, there were already signs, not loud, not sudden, but steady. The balance between strength and strain began to tilt. The empire, vast and proud, was beginning to feel the weight of its own reach. And with that weight, came weariness. When Marcus Aurelius died in 180 CE, he left the empire to his son, Commodus, a transition of power more like a father's gift than a state's decision. But Commodus was no philosopher. His rule, marked by extravagance and self-glorification, pulled Rome away from the careful dignity of his father's reign. He fancied himself a gladiator, fought in the arena, and renamed Rome after himself. To the people, these were signs. Not of madness. Though some believed that too, but of change. For Rome had long been guided by virtus, by gravitas, by the steady hand of reasoned rule. And now, that hand trembled. Commodus was assassinated in 192 CE, and with his death came a deeper unsteadiness. The year that followed, 193 CE, would be remembered as the year of the 5 emperors. In quick succession, generals rose and fell, claiming power with the support of armies and the price of loyalty. The Praetorian Guard, once protectors of the emperor, auctioned the throne to the highest bidder. It was not only politics that trembled. The empire itself began to stretch beyond its comfort. Rome's borders were long and exposed. The Rhine and the Danube, once solid frontiers, now felt the touch of pressure from beyond. Germanic tribes moved restlessly in the north, while in the east, the Parthian Empire grew bold, later replaced by the Sassanids, who were stronger still. To hold these borders, Rome relied increasingly on its military. But that military was changing. Soldiers were no longer mostly citizens with deep ties to the homeland. Many were mercenaries, drawn from distant provinces, loyal to their commanders more than to Rome itself. Armies were expensive, and the burden of their upkeep strained the imperial treasury. Taxes rose. Inflation soared. The silver content of Roman coins dropped steadily, a quiet signal to merchants and citizens alike that all was not well. Trade slowed. Cities, once vibrant, began to shrink. Some roads fell into disrepair. The grandness of Rome still stood, but shadows began to gather behind the facades. And then came plague. In the mid-3rd century, a deadly pandemic, likely smallpox or measles, swept through the empire. Known now as the Plague of Cyprian, it killed thousands each day at its peak. Towns were emptied. Armies weakened. Entire regions fell silent beneath the weight of illness and grief. As the people suffered, emperors rose and fell with stunning speed. Between 235 and 284 CE, Rome saw over 25 emperors, most of them military men, many of them murdered or killed in battle. This period is now known as the crisis of the 3rd century, a time of civil war, economic collapse, and near fragmentation. Some provinces even broke away entirely. The Gallic Empire in the west, the Palmyrene Empire in the east, Rome, for a time, was no longer one. And yet, remarkably, it endured. Because in moments of greatest strain, there are always those who rise with unexpected strength. One such man was Aurelian, who ruled from 270 to 275 CE. In just 5 years, he reconquered the breakaway provinces, restored the empire's unity, and surrounded the city of Rome with tall defensive walls, walls that still stand today. He was called Restitutor Orbis, the restorer of the world. But even he fell to assassination, as so many had before him. Still, his efforts bought time. And not long after, a new leader emerged. One who would reshape the empire in fundamental ways. His name was Diocletian. When he came to power in 284 CE, the empire was still fragile, its foundation cracked. But Diocletian saw the problem clearly: the empire was too large for one man to govern. So he divided it. Not in spirit, but in function. He created the Tetrarchy, rule by 4. 2 senior emperors, called Augusti, and 2 junior emperors, Caesars, each responsible for a portion of the empire. This system was meant to bring stability, to allow better management, and to make succession more predictable. It was a bold experiment. And for a time, it worked. Diocletian also reformed the tax system, reorganized the military, and undertook massive public works. But his rule came with severity. He imposed strict controls on prices and wages. And he launched one of the last and most brutal persecutions of Christians, seeing their refusal to honor the Roman gods as a threat to unity. Eventually, Diocletian retired. One of the few emperors ever to do so voluntarily, and faded into the quiet of his gardens. But his reforms remained, even as the system he built began to strain under the ambitions of his successors. Among them was Constantine, a name that would echo through history. Constantine rose through civil war, defeating rival emperors, and in time, claiming sole rule. At the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 CE, he is said to have seen a vision, a symbol in the sky, promising victory if he fought under the sign of the Christian God. He won the battle. And the empire changed forever. In 313 CE, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, granting religious tolerance throughout the empire, especially to Christians, who had endured centuries of persecution. He would later convert himself, and Christianity would move from the shadows of Rome to its very heart. Temples would slowly give way to churches. Pagan rituals would mingle with Christian liturgies. A once persecuted faith would become the empire's moral compass, and, in time, its official religion. But Constantine's changes were not only spiritual. In 330 CE, he founded a new capital, Constantinople, built on the ancient city of Byzantium, at the crossroads of Europe and Asia. It was a city of marble and mosaics, markets and cathedrals, a reflection of Rome, but also something new. From there, the eastern half of the empire would be governed with fresh energy, even as the west began to falter. Because while the east found new strength, the Western Roman Empire, the old heartland of Italy, Gaul, and Hispania, began to drift. The economy continued to weaken. Cities shrank. Roads were less traveled. The Senate, once mighty, had become largely symbolic. Power rested with generals and provincial rulers, and the ability to respond to crises grew slower and more fragile. Beyond the borders, the pressure grew. Germanic tribes, once kept at bay, began to push inward. Some were fleeing even greater threats from the east, including the terrifying arrival of the Huns, a nomadic people from the steppes. These movements would only intensify in the years to come. But that is a later chapter. For now, the empire remains, though the light has dimmed. The people still speak Latin, still build with stone, still offer prayers beneath painted ceilings. But the rhythm has changed. The empire no longer hums with growth, but groans with burden. The dream of Rome still floats above its cities, but its feet are growing unsteady. Yet still, it stands. Even in decline, Rome endures. Even in strain, it holds together, if only just. The seeds have been sown. The fall is not yet. But the soil remembers. Part 5, A Divided Empire. The Roman Empire was once a single breath, long and deep, rising from the hills of Italy and spreading outward, uninterrupted. But as the centuries passed, the breath began to catch. And eventually, it divided. Not with a crack, but with a long exhale, one half stronger, one half quieter. By the early 4th century, the weight of Rome had shifted. The empire was no longer truly one, even if it still wore the same name. The East, anchored by Constantinople, rich in trade, protected by strong walls and well-governed cities, grew brighter. The West, still centered in Italy, but stretched thin across Gaul, Britannia, and Hispania, began to dim. At first, the division was practical. As Diocletian and then Constantine had arranged it, the empire was governed in halves. Each had its own emperor, its own administration, its own responsibilities. But beneath this structure, the differences deepened. The Eastern Roman Empire was wealthier. Its cities were denser, its infrastructure newer, its armies better supplied. Greek was the language of culture and diplomacy, and its capital, Constantinople, stood at the crossroads of continents, watched over by sea and stone. The Western Roman Empire, meanwhile, faced growing difficulties. Its cities were older, its economy weaker, and its frontiers increasingly under pressure. Latin remained the language of state, but it was changing, blending with the tongues of local peoples, softening into the roots of future languages, Italian, French, Spanish. And all around the West, the world was shifting. Across the Rhine and the Danube, Germanic tribes were moving, not just raiding, but migrating. The Visigoths, Vandals, Franks, Suebi, Alemanni, and Ostrogoths, each with their own kings, customs, and paths, edged closer to Roman lands. Some came peacefully, seeking land and protection. Others came by force, testing Rome's strength. One moment, above all, signaled a change in the wind. In 376 CE, a large group of Visigoths, fleeing the violent advance of the Huns, were allowed to cross the Danube and settle within the empire. They were hungry, displaced, and in need of land. But the Roman administration, unprepared and corrupt, failed to care for them. Food was withheld. Children were taken as payment. Resentment grew. And then, rebellion. In 378 CE, the Eastern Roman Emperor Valens marched out to meet the Visigoths near the town of Adrianople. He did not wait for reinforcements. He underestimated his enemy. The battle that followed was a catastrophe. Valens was killed. His army was destroyed. It was one of the worst defeats in Roman history, not just a lost battle, but a wound in the empire's confidence. For the first time in centuries, a Roman emperor had died in combat against a barbarian force. And yet, even this was not the end. Rome continued. Treaties were signed. Visigoths were settled, though uneasily. And life went on, day by day, beneath the weight of memory. But the center was no longer holding. In the West, emperors came and went in rapid succession. Many were figureheads, children, generals, or puppets propped up by powerful men. The real authority often lay with magister militum, military commanders who ruled behind the throne. One of the most notable was Stilicho, a Roman general of mixed heritage who served as protector and regent for the young emperor Honorius. Stilicho was skilled and loyal. But he faced challenges no general could fully contain. Among them, a name that would soon echo across Rome in fear. Alaric. He was king of the Visigoths, once a Roman ally, now disillusioned and driven by need. For years, Alaric had sought a lasting peace, land for his people, recognition within the Roman system. But Rome, weakened and divided, could not offer what he required. So Alaric marched. Not to destroy, but to demand. In 410 CE, after years of negotiation and insult, the unthinkable happened. Alaric's forces entered the city of Rome. For 3 days, the Visigoths moved through its streets. They plundered, but with restraint. They spared churches. They did not burn the city. And yet, the effect was profound. Rome, the eternal city, untouched by foreign hands for over 800 years, had fallen. Not destroyed. But entered. Breached. To many across the empire, it felt like the end of the world. The great Saint Jerome, writing from Bethlehem, asked, "If Rome can perish, what can be safe?" But the world did not end. Rome remained. Shaken, yes. But standing. The city slowly recovered. The Visigoths moved on. And still, life went on, as it always does. Yet in the decades that followed, the Western Empire faded further from its former self. The Vandals, crossing from Spain into North Africa, captured Carthage in 439 CE, cutting off Rome's vital grain supply. From there, they launched raids across the Mediterranean. In 455 CE, they too entered Rome. This time, the sack was longer, the damage deeper. The word vandalism would later come from this moment, though, in truth, the violence was no worse than many wars before. The empire's borders were dissolving. Britain, once a far-off but loyal Roman province, was left to its own defense around 410 CE. Roman rule simply faded. The legions departed. The villas were abandoned. Into the vacuum came the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, planting the seeds of future kingdoms. In Gaul and Hispania, Roman governors lost control. Local rulers rose. Germanic kings were crowned where Roman magistrates once stood. Roman culture remained, in law, in language, in faith, but the empire itself was no longer the one that Augustus had shaped. The final Western emperors were shadows. Children, often, or men without armies. They ruled from Ravenna, not Rome, a city safer behind marshes and walls. Real power rested with generals, especially one named Flavius Orestes, who placed his own son on the throne in 475 CE. The boy's name was Romulus, a name that echoed the founder of the city. Fitting, then, that he would be the last. He ruled for just a year. In 476 CE, a Germanic general named Odoacer, once a soldier in the Roman army, led a revolt. He deposed the boy emperor, sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople, and declared himself king of Italy. No new emperor was appointed in the West. There was no great battle. No last stand. Just a quiet ending, like a candle going out. And with that, the Western Roman Empire, the world of the Senate and the legions, the aqueducts and amphitheaters, the roads and laws and dreams, came to a close. But not with fire. Not with a crash. With a sigh. A gentle fading, after centuries of light. Part 6, The Last Light. The Western Roman Empire did not fall in a single day. There was no last army defending its walls, no last speech echoing through the Senate. It slipped away like the final hour of twilight, a dimming so slow that most who lived through it did not know it had ended until long after the sun was gone. After the deposition of Romulus Augustulus in 476 CE, there was no coronation, no successor. The boy emperor, perhaps 14 years old, was spared. He was sent away quietly, given a pension, and allowed to live out his days in peace. The empire that bore him simply let go, tired, hollowed, unable to resist. In the place of empire came something older, and yet somehow new, kingship. Odoacer, once a soldier in the Roman army, became king of Italy. He ruled not in defiance of Rome, but in its shadow, acknowledging the Eastern Roman Emperor in Constantinople as symbolic overlord, even as he held real power himself. The Roman Senate still existed, in name. Roman law still lingered, in parchment and practice. Latin still shaped the language of courts and contracts. But the soul of the empire, that long-held belief in a single, unified Rome, had dimmed. And yet, there was no silence. In the cities of Italy, people still woke to tend their shops. Farmers still walked their fields. Children still learned Latin prayers and copied lines of Virgil. Rome had ended, and yet it had not. It had become something else. Across the former provinces, power now rested in the hands of new rulers, most of them once called barbarians, though many had long lived within the empire's borders, served in its armies, and spoken its language. In Gaul, the Franks under Clovis began to build a kingdom. In Hispania, the Visigoths held sway. In North Africa, the Vandals ruled from Carthage. These kingdoms adopted much from Rome. Its roads, its coinage, its traditions of law and architecture, even its religion. By the late 5th century, most of these new rulers, or their successors, would convert to Christianity, not only as a faith, but as a bridge to the Roman past. And in the East, the empire did not fall. The Eastern Roman Empire, now often called the Byzantine Empire, continued, strong, rich, and learned, for nearly 1,000 years more. Its capital, Constantinople, became the new Rome in truth, if not in name. There, emperors still wore purple, still ruled in Latin and later Greek, still passed laws in the tradition of the old Caesars. It was from Constantinople that Justinian I would later rule in the 6th century, dreaming of reunifying the empire, and commissioning great works like the Hagia Sophia, a dome that seemed to touch heaven itself. Under his rule, Roman law was gathered and codified into the Corpus Juris Civilis, a body of law that would echo through medieval and modern Europe alike. But in the West, Rome had become a memory. Not forgotten, far from it, but remembered now in stone and story. The great Forum, once the center of the world, grew quiet. Temples crumbled. The Senate met less and less, until at last it stopped altogether. The city of Rome remained, but smaller, humbler. Pilgrims came to see its relics, not its rulers. Grass grew where once parades had passed. And yet, the dream endured. Monks copied Roman texts by candlelight. Bishops spoke Latin in their sermons. The idea of Rome, of law, of order, of civilization, lived on in cathedrals and chronicles, in oaths and architecture. Even the word emperor did not disappear. Centuries later, when Charlemagne, king of the Franks, was crowned in the year 800, it was not merely as king, but as emperor of the Romans. The idea of Rome still conferred majesty. It still gave shape to authority. Because Rome had never been only a city, or even a state. It had been an idea. An idea of unity, of order, of a world held together by something greater than borders. And ideas do not fall as empires do. They drift, change, and reappear. The Western Roman Empire, then, did not vanish. It transformed. It became a thread woven through the fabric of Europe. It flowed into the laws of England, the cathedrals of France, the libraries of Ireland. It echoed in the tongues of Italy and Spain, in the seals of emperors, in the prayers of monks. Even the roads remained, narrow and worn, but still there. The same roads Roman legions had once marched now carried pilgrims, traders, and messengers. Over them passed not only feet, but memory. So when we speak of the fall of Rome, we do not speak of a single day or a single act. We speak of a long, gentle twilight, a world dimming slowly, century by century, until its light became the stars. Because even as the Western Empire faded, it left behind a sky full of constellations. And some lights, once kindled, never truly go dark. Part 7, Echoes and Memory. And now we rest. The story has been told, not in shouts, but in whispers. Not in battles, but in time. Rome has fallen, yes, but also not. For empires do not vanish. They leave behind shapes, shadows, and seeds. They echo. And Rome's echo is long. Listen closely, and you will still hear it, in ways you might not expect. It hums in our words. The languages of much of the Western world, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, all carry Latin in their bones. Even in English, Rome lingers. In every justice, every temple, every forum and emperor, its syllables live on. It lives in our calendars. The months of July and August, named for Julius Caesar and Augustus, pass through every year. We count in Roman numerals when we name kings, popes, and Super Bowls. The days of our week trace back through Roman gods, hidden behind newer names. It lives in law. The idea that rules can be written, interpreted, appealed. That justice is not arbitrary, but structured, comes from Rome. The civil codes of Europe, the foundations of Western legal thought, rest on Roman pillars. Even the phrase, innocent until proven guilty, has roots in Roman courts. It lives in architecture. The arch, the dome, the column, all carried forward from Roman hands. Cities across the world, built long after the fall, still borrow from Roman design. Capitals, basilicas, courthouses, their shapes remember something older. It lives in stories. In the rise and fall of empires that followed. In Renaissance painters and Enlightenment thinkers who looked back to Rome for guidance and glory. In maps drawn with Roman names, and books that begin with the ruins of the Forum. In statues of Caesar and Cicero, standing quietly in museums. It lives in thought, in the tension between republic and empire, between freedom and order. In the questions of how power should be held, and who should hold it. These are Roman questions, still unanswered. And it lives, too, in faith. From a quiet hill in Jerusalem, a new faith rose. It traveled Roman roads, spoke in Roman tongues, and was shaped by Roman persecution. In time, it became the empire's own, and outlived it. The Christian Church, especially the Roman Catholic Church, carried forward not just Roman religion, but Roman structure, a hierarchy, a seat of authority, a tradition of law and ritual and Latin. Even the Pope, seated in Rome, wears the title Pontifex Maximus, once the high priest of the pagan gods, now the shepherd of a different flock. Rome shifted. It flowed into what came after. And in that sense, it never truly ended. It became Europe, and later, the West. It became the past behind the present, a foundation covered by new walls, but still there, beneath the stone. We look back on Rome not to mourn it, but to remember what it was, and what it gave. It was not perfect. It was often cruel. It conquered, enslaved, and demanded loyalty with the edge of a sword. But it also built. It imagined. It dreamed of order in a chaotic world. And it carried that dream for centuries. We are, in small ways, still part of that dream. So let us look once more, not at its fall, but at its horizon. At the road stretching beyond the gates. At the domes glinting in the afternoon light. At the silent ruins, where grasses now grow through cracks in marble, and birds nest in forgotten temples. Let us see the city, not as it was in its last moment, but as it always wished to be. Eternal. A place where past and present meet. Where time is not a straight road, but a circle. Where memory is not lost, but softened, like the voice of history drifting across the centuries. You may be far from Rome now. The night may be deep, the stars quietly watching. But still, you carry it. In the words you speak. In the ideas you hold. In the stories you tell. In the paths you walk. Rome sleeps, yes. But dreams do not end when the dreamer rests. They linger. Softly. Like this story. Like this breath. Like the memory of stone. Thanks for spending a little time with me tonight. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and subscribe for more gentle journeys into the past. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next one.